Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. We will be talking about the last episode of the Book of Boba Fett, so if you haven't seen that yet, you might want to come back later. Alright, so today we'll be talking about one of the coolest locations in Star Wars history, at least in my opinion, this new orbital ring that we've seen in the Book of Boba Fett. I got a lot of comments after the episode came out, people messaging me saying that they knew I would love this sequence, and, well, they were right. So I want to talk all about the ring, give my explanation for what's going on, what it is, how it works, and of course, if I missed something, feel free to let me know down below. Let's get the simple out of the way. We know from the credits that the ring is called Glavis. Given that there's a direct shuttle to Tatooine, we can also assume that it's probably somewhere in the Outer Rim, maybe even proximate to Tatooine itself. A lot of the information we actually get about the ring comes from that first sequence there. We can tell for one that it's much smaller than a Halo ring or a Ringworld from Larry Niven's series. It's definitely more on the scale of very, very large space station rather than planet-sized megastructure. The most interesting question for me is, how is the ring being lit? What's going on here? As you can easily see while watching the episode, there are several bands of light that travel up and down the ring very quickly. This is very similar to the design of a Ringworld from Larry Niven's series, which has the same sort of bands of light moving across the ring, but because of size, they're meant to simulate an entire day and night. The mechanics there are different though. Those rings are so big that there's actually a star in the middle, and the star is shaded, creating the night spots. Obviously, the ring here is not large enough to have a star in the middle, although it is possible it could do something like Centerpoint Station, which had a very miniaturized star, but we can see from one of those first shots that there's something else going on. Now, I initially assumed that this was showing us a mirror, and that there was one or several mirrors reflecting light down to the ring's surface. However, and shout out to Alex from Star Wars Explained for letting me know this, if you listen to the audio descriptions, it actually presents a different story. It states specifically that the ring is missing a section, which is allowing in light from the nearby star. Now, I don't think that necessarily makes sense, and I'm not sure if the audio description there is accurately capturing what's going on. That is, I think, the common sense interpretation when you look at this scene. It's what I first thought. It looks like the ring does have an endpoint, more like a perfectly rounded horseshoe, I guess. But logically, I'm not sure that makes sense. For one, we've seen the underside of the ring. It's not this reflective nature, which is why I assumed it was some sort of mirror. Rather, it's an entire dark side superstructure with factories and whatever else, as described again by the descriptive audio. I've also been thinking about how the light travels, and I don't know if that necessarily makes sense with a single aperture. For one, there are several bands of light. I also don't understand how a single aperture rotating or orbiting around a star would allow a fixed amount of light to move across the surface like that. I would think if there was one section open, then one spot of the ring would have frequent brightness, while others would have some, and then a large portion would not get any light whatsoever, or would be getting light from the side of the ring, so not directly on. Another option is that the ring does have that section missing, but also has maybe a series of mirrors to help simulate the day-night cycle. I'm not sure. Either way, it may not be a full ring, there may be something else going on. If you've got any ideas of how that might work, again, I'm not a physicist or a scientist, I don't know a whole lot about orbital mechanics or anything like that, let me know down in the comments section. Anyway, continuing on to this shot here, we can see that the ring does seem to have the traditional walls that Halo rings or Ringworlds have. However, most of the time, those are described as the mechanism that keeps the actual atmosphere within the ring's surface. That's clearly not the case here, as you can actually see a really nice detail in this shot, which shows that the atmosphere goes beyond the point of those walls. I really love how the entire ring has a super detailed surface with streets, those rail lines. There are plazas and parks. This is definitely a nice place to be, at least in my opinion, although of course there is a shadier side as well. It also seems like different parts of the ring have different density, and just overall the design is really, really impressive, especially for something that appears in like 10 minutes of an episode. We also saw a similar degree of detail with Mos Espa, for example. That of course appeared many times throughout the series, but I do wonder whether they're using perhaps AI to help generate these cities and textures. This shot also shows that the ring is not very wide, maybe a kilometer or so. That being said, when you see the full scope of the ring itself, you can tell that this is still a very, very large structure by Star Wars standards. Moving on to the surface now, unsurprisingly, given the size of the ring, most of the buildings on the surface are pretty squat. I do wonder whether there may be a true downtown somewhere with more density, but of course there are pedestrians and speeders. One thing I didn't actually notice when watching is that the train moves perpendicular to the way Mando is walking, and he is walking sort of down the ring. Kind of unexpected. You wouldn't think the train would be needed to move sort of across the ring surface, but it probably does both. Mando's walking here, though, really puts into perspective just how fast the day-night cycle is. Probably fairly chaotic living on the ring. The surface reminded me a lot of Nar Shaddaa from Dark Forces 2. Not only in the architecture, which is definitely very original trilogy inspired, and actually reminded me a lot of 90s Star Wars video game architecture, but also because just how sort of oppressive space is. The other really good comparison I saw was Citadel Station from KOTOR 2, but overall I think they absolutely nailed the look of this ring, more so than I would have even guessed if someone explained it to me. It maintains that original trilogy aesthetic, but is distinctly different than most of what we've seen in The Mandalorian or the Book of Boba Fett. Some people probably associate rings solely with Halo, and for those people it might feel a bit weird, but I think it works perfectly because of Larry Niven's Ringworld series, which is very much a staple of 1970s science fiction, as is Star Wars, which was of course heavily influenced by its contemporaries. The surface of the ring does feel like it's fairly fancy. The Mandalorian is definitely a bit out of place, but there is a much less well-populated underground section. Then there is, again, what the descriptive audio calls the dark side of the world, which is filled with factories and industrial sections. I think that's an awesome detail that adds a whole lot to the world building and the sort of logic of the ring itself. In a later scene, we can also see quite logically that the outer edge of the ring seems to have space for ship docking. The walls do seem to be a bit lower in places, probably in commercial districts or freight districts, and I think that's a nice touch. Presumably there are also sections of the ring's body, its flank, which have umbilicals and other things to attach even larger ships, perhaps. One piece of logic I really like is that you can see the ship dock is somewhat close to a mass transit hub, so you can get to or from a drop-off or pick-off point pretty quickly and move across the ring. Another detail I like is that the elevated rail system has elevated stations, and you can see that they actually have walkways to several other buildings, which again, the amount of detail here to make this look like a real place is just mind-blowing. In one of the last shots, you can see that the perpendicular tracks that I mentioned earlier, the train tracks that run horizontally across the ring, seem to be positioned pretty evenly across the structure, which makes sense. It would help connect people or maybe transit hubs on the edges to the rest of the ring itself. Overall, though, just an amazing location. I really like how the colors and some of the shots seem to be a reference to old 70s Ringworld book covers. And yeah, just a very unique location. There are other rings in Star Wars, but usually those are artificial planetary rings like on Kuat or Mon Calamari. The scale for those is probably more impressive, but as a pure space station, I thought this was really cool, and I don't think there's been another straight up space station style ring, whether this is a complete ring or not, like this. But guys, that's all I have for today. Until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.